RKelly just cracked open what many insiders call the industry's darkest secret. He claims he handed the FBI a set of files so serious they could shake JayZ and Diddy's worlds completely. Most people thought his story was finished, buried under convictions and endless headlines, but that silence just snapped wide open again. This week, lawyers confirmed a sudden emergency motion demanding his release after what they describe as a credible threat on his life. Sources whisper that the leak didn't come from the outside. It started inside a North Carolina cell block. Guards are now scrambling to explain why Kelly suddenly collapsed just days after that paperwork landed on federal desks. The timeline alone has people asking questions no one seems eager to answer. The filings mention an overdose, a canceled surgery, and a rapid transfer into solitary confinement. Government attorneys brushed it off as fantasy. Yet Diddy's legal team went noticeably quiet, and JayZ's name began popping back up in sealed correspondence. None of it lines up. Not the timing, not the denials, and definitely not the speed at which everything was locked down. Something bigger is clearly moving underneath the surface, and the next leak doesn't stop with court papers. Federal documents start shifting at the same time. Hospital call logs suddenly vanish. It's the last week of January when the North Carolina prison slips into a quiet lockdown, called routine by staff. But an internal memo dated 3 days after Kelly's emergency motion references outside interference and media-sensitive exposure. And that phrase alone sets off alarms. Insiders say that phrase usually means one thing only. The press is getting way too close to a leak. Inmates describe doors slamming early, people being held back without explanation, and guards walking the tier with phones completely shut off. The mood flipped fast. One employee quietly admits that a laptop from the administrative wing was seized by federal investigators just hours after the hospital incident, and that kind of move doesn't happen unless alarms are already blaring. Then comes the transfer. Official statements rush out saying no irregularities, but the timing feels way too clean, almost rehearsed. Someone was clearly expecting this story to break, and that's the first real red flag. It's unsettling how quickly a federal agency can coordinate total silence, especially when the person at the center is already locked up. The very next day, a second motion appears online, then disappears from the court server within minutes like it was never meant to be seen. Copies still circulate among journalists, though, because screenshots don't lie. The document is signed by Kelly's lawyer and references confidential cooperation with ongoing federal matters. But no one explains what those matters actually involve. By nightfall, industry texts are flying everywhere. Whispers about tapes, talk of offshore accounts, and quiet hints about connections between names that were never supposed to appear on the same page start spreading fast, and suddenly the tension feels impossible to ignore. The FBI refuses to confirm any deal, but the phrase confidential cooperation isn't normal prisoner language at all. People familiar with the system say that wording reads more like protection than paperwork. 2 days later, a new claim surfaces through a Chicago contact, alleging that Diddy's team requested a sealed hearing the same week the Kelly filing became public. What was brushed off as coincidence now feels staged, almost like choreography planned ahead of time. At this point, JayZ's name still isn't printed in any official filing, but it's floating everywhere else. Old producers suddenly start talking about best of both worlds again, and past tension gets dragged back into the spotlight. That 2004 pepper spray incident at Madison Square Garden stops being simple tour gossip and starts sounding a lot more serious. Kelly's recent motion even points to that night as proof of long-standing hostility. The document describes physical intimidation by associates tied to a well-known artist without naming anyone directly. Insiders close to JayZ dismiss it as paranoia, but even they admit the memory of that night never fully settled. 2 crew members were later banned from the venue for undisclosed reasons, and that detail still raises eyebrows years later. Nobody explains why any of this matters right now, until a leak drops that one of those men is under a quiet federal review tied to past events connected to Diddy. That overlap is way too tight to brush off. Every path keeps looping back to the same small circle of powerful names that have dominated the industry for nearly 2 decades, and people are finally noticing the pattern. Then comes the collapse, Kelly's medical episode that changes the tone completely. It hits on a Friday morning, sudden hospitalization, unexplained fainting, reports of blood clots, and medication records that are suddenly missing. Within hours, his attorney releases a statement saying Kelly may have been overexposed to substances administered without consent, and that single phrase spreads faster than any denial the Bureau tries to issue. Former guards start talking quietly about a sealed-off wing, sudden changes in meal rotation, and a doctor flown in from Atlanta for what they describe as a non-standard review. Officials dismiss it all as fantasy, but their own timeline confirms a full security sweep just hours before the collapse, and that detail doesn't sit right. Here's where it stops adding up. If nothing happened, why lock down an entire unit? Why remove staff and block press access to medical records? The optics look bad, and the silence around it all feels even worse. Inside the industry, the reaction splits fast between panic and disbelief. Some people freeze, others start moving quietly, and nobody wants their name caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Diddy's conviction last year already shattered the illusion that certain figures were untouchable, and that memory is still fresh. JayZ's brand has always depended on distance. No scandals, no noise, no mess. But as insiders suddenly go offline, people notice that Roc Nation's social media deletes 2 older posts featuring RKelly within 24 hours of the leak. Publicly, it's brushed off as routine content cleanup. Privately, insiders say it's fear of contamination. One longtime associate claims, "There's a lot of old footage out there. If he's really talking, nothing stays buried." It sounds dramatic at first until people remember that Diddy's downfall didn't start with charges. It started with whispers, then footage, then quiet federal movement that no one could stop. The parallels are impossible to miss, and that's what's making everyone nervous, especially the ones still pretending they never crossed paths. The tension isn't loud, it's quiet, and that's what makes it worse. People can feel the pattern forming, even if no one wants to say it out loud. The FBI's public denials land way too clean. A spokesperson labels the allegations fanciful conspiracy just hours after Kelly's lawyer files the motion, and that speed raises eyebrows fast. The wording feels cold, rehearsed, like it was ready to go before any real review could even happen. Sources inside the Bureau say a standard review usually takes days, not hours. This response feels more like damage control than procedure. One former agent describes it as the language of preemption, the way departments speak when they're trying to shield something delicate from exposure. Things get even stranger when it comes out that the medical facility logged Kelly under a pseudonym. That detail only surfaces because of a clerical mistake in a transportation form later leaked to reporters. Using a false identity for a federal inmate isn't protocol, it's containment. And that detail alone sends the speculation into overdrive. As this keeps moving, small inconsistencies start piling up fast, and they're getting harder to ignore. Diddy's sentencing hearing in New York is quietly rescheduled the same week Kelly is hospitalized. Court officials blame a calendar conflict, but 3 insiders say federal prosecutors asked for the delay to avoid overlapping media coverage, and that detail changes everything. That's not coincidence, it's choreography all over again. At the same time, JayZ's team releases photos of a charity appearance with a smiling mayor, the cleanest image of distance possible. Calm, polished, untouched. But reporters notice his security detail has doubled, and a press handler shuts down all off-topic questions immediately. No one explains why, because no one officially asks. A person untouched by charges usually doesn't need that level of protection. The contrast between the calm surface and the frantic backstage tells its own story, and people inside the media world notice it instantly. And here's where things take a turn no one saw coming. Because this isn't just about old interviews, it's not just about resurfaced clips. And it's definitely not just about internet rumors. Behind the scenes, something much bigger may be unfolding. Sources close to the situation suggest federal investigators have access to evidence that could completely reshape the narrative. Evidence that, if verified, would send shockwaves through the entire industry. And suddenly, the silence from certain camps isn't just silence anymore. It's strategic. The question now isn't what happened, it's who knew and when. If even a fraction of these claims are proven true, the fallout wouldn't just affect one person. It could ripple through music, business, and power circles at the highest level. And that's where part 2 begins. Because what we're about to break down next changes everything. New documents, new connections, and one unexpected move from investigators that could flip this entire story upside down. You don't want to miss what's coming next. Stay tuned.